Hello, folks. Welcome back to World War II TV. My guest today for his second appearance on the channel is Rob Child. Rob is an author, historian, podcast, and Emmy-nominated director. He's here to talk about his most recent book, which is about African-American Medal of Honor recipients. And if you're new to the channel, there's a few new people recently. Don't forget all the information you need, book links, website links is in that description below, and consider becoming a patron and/or channel member and sharing what we're doing on social media. And again, I will point out that about 60% of you who watch this channel regularly are not subscribed. It helps you, it helps me. If you actually click that button and become a subscriber, you'll get the notifications about future shows, and I get the algorithm kicking in to help expand the channel. So that's the homework done. I'll bring Rob in. So good afternoon, Rob. How are you today?
Oh, very well, Paul. Thanks for inviting me on again.
Brilliant. So what have you been up to since we last spoke?
I have been doing a lot of film work, actually, television work, and I've been looking into actually early, different than military history, early Christian history. I took a course on ancient Christianity, and I'm very interested in that time period as well. So I try to keep my hand and interest in different things. But military history is my first love, as you know.
Yeah, well, as we said there, military history is lots of people's first love. It doesn't necessarily pay the bills. It's
right.
You can do other stuff, and but yeah, and one of the things I admire about your career is that you have done different things. You do something, go and do something else, come back to it again. But anyway, you've got your PowerPoint ready to go. Tell me when you need to move on, and we're going to talk about these Medal of Honor recipients. And folks, if you have questions, fire away, and I'll post them to Rob as we go along. So over to you, Rob.
Okay, very good. Well, for people that don't know about this story, I wrote the book called Immortal Valor, and it just came out in the UK and in the United States this month in paperback, which was a very good sign from the publisher that there was great interest in the title, because that's the way the publishing world works. I discovered that some books never go into paperback, but this one did. So we're very happy about Immortal Valor, the African-American Medal of Honor recipients of World War II, going into paperback. So you can pick it up at your local store. It's on the shelves. And going through some of these, there's a story behind this cover here. It has a different cover. It has Sergeant Edward Carter on the cover of the book, of the hardcover and the softcover. And when they came to me with this idea, I kept thinking that, and we've talked about this, Paul, Band of Brothers, the popularity of Band of Brothers. I told them early on that I felt like this story could make a series of Band of Brothers, of these 7 stories. And they actually came back with this cover for Immortal Valor that I absolutely loved. But they felt like they wanted one of the Medal of Honor recipients on the cover. But I love this cover. So this was the first cover of Immortal Valor.
It definitely has that Band of Brothers vibe of that, that silhouetted shot there from the DVDs and the covers. But just before we get going, just completely random question, but I always find it interesting. Where do you sit on the use of the word winner, recipient? Can you win the medal? Are you awarded the medal? Because I know different historians have different views on this, and I personally prefer the title recipient. But where do you stand on this one?
Well, I have to admit ignorance going into this, and I don't mind admitting that these men did, quote unquote, win the Medal of Honor, but that's not the accepted term in the United States or around the world. That you don't win the Medal of Honor, you are awarded or you receive the Medal of Honor. And I was corrected on that by a number of people, very, very politely. And I said, well, to the publisher, I've been hearing back on this. People don't win the Medal of Honor. They are awarded it. So on the paperback release, I said, we have to change the title to Immortal Valor, the Black Medal of Honor recipients of World War II. So I've gotten with the program.
But some people think recipient sounds like receiving it. It's not necessarily demonstrating the valor shown. So I can kind of see both points there. Awarded, I think, is a really good, but you can't be an awardant. There's no word, but I do see that recipient coming from receive sounds like you've been receiving it, like you've received your pay or you've received your a new helmet. So I
Yeah, they're just passing them out.
points of view. I do see points of view, but winning, and it varies across nationalities as well. I've noticed that with doing this show is that some nationalities seem to say winning for Victoria Crosses, and some say recipient. There is no universally agreed principle on this, but it's always good for discussion. But anyway, back to you. That was just my first question.
Well, just to follow up on that, on the Victoria Cross in UK, I know you're in France, but how do they phrase that? Do they say you've won the Victoria Cross, or do they say you've been awarded it?
Yeah, both of those. There doesn't seem to be a clear accepted version. I've seen both used. Again, it seems to be more like a newspaper, popular media would say winning, and someone who's a military historian might say received, recipient, awarded. So, but both, both are in common usage, and it's not like you're committing some awful social faux pas if you use the other person's perceived wrong term. It's both. They all run parallel, but it's just an interesting debate, and with no conclusion to it, I think.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's the military historians that are most sensitive to it, I think.
Okay, brilliant. Anyway, back to you.
So let's introduce folks to some of these incredible heroes. This first gentleman, Edward Carter, was born. You can read on the screen, but I'll kind of summarize. He had an incredible military career because he was a natural-born soldier. And he was born in Los Angeles, but his parents moved to Shanghai, China in the early 30s. And he actually lived in the international settlement in Shanghai. And when the Japanese attacked Shanghai in the early 30s, before 37, he ran away from home and decided he was going to have an adventure. And he joined the Chinese 19th Army and began fighting the Japanese Marines who were invading Shanghai. And his parents didn't know where he was. His father didn't know where he was. And he had heard that he had joined the army, so he went to his commander, Edward Carter's commander, and asked if his son was, in the army. And his commander said, yes, as a matter of fact, he's done very well, and we're going to promote him to a lieutenant. And his father said, no, you can't. He's only 15. So he took him out of the army, and he went back to the Shanghai Military Academy where he was attending school, and to according it a little bit shorter, he ended up going back to Los Angeles in his later teens, and it was during the Depression, and there wasn't any work for young Black Americans in the United States. There was hardly any work for anyone. So he started reading stories of the Spanish Civil War and decided to join the Abraham Lincoln Brigade over there and fight against the fascists. So he actually fought in the Spanish Civil War, and for about 3 years, came back to the States, and in 1940, when it wrapped up, 2 years later, he joined the military at Fort Benning, because again, there was still no work for young Black Americans. And he had had so much military experience that he was the very best shot at Fort Benning. He was written up in the Post-Gazette that he was the best marksman. But he was assigned to a quartermaster unit, and he didn't even carry a gun. And he expressed frustration about that to his wife. He got married when he was at Fort Benning, but his quartermaster unit shipped over to Europe, and he ended up being able to join frontline forces after Eisenhower issued a letter inviting African Americans from service units into white rifle companies, because there was such high attrition after the Battle of the Bulge that he came in and joined the 12th Armored Division. I think it was the 56th Infantry, part of that. And he was part of the spearhead into Germany in the early days of March 1945, when it was unscouted territory. So they were going in without any insignia on their uniform. They were Patton's Mystery Division, and he ended up how he received the Medal of Honor is they were pushing into Germany, and they were ambushed by Germans from this abandoned warehouse about 150 yards off the road, and they had an 88 and they had a machine gun nest, and he told his commander that if he could take 3 guys with him, he could take it out. So he says, well, have at it. So he started crossing over the open ground. 2 of the guys were killed. The third, I believe, got back and recovered. But he had gotten so far ahead towards the Germans that he couldn't go back. He knew if he retreated, he'd just be killed. But he was shot 9 times and was bleeding there. Actually, he started to drink some water from a canteen, and the bullet came through his hand. And so he couldn't go anywhere. So he lay there thinking that, well, if they come out to look for me, I've got my Thompson submachine gun, and I'll just take them out. And so he planned his moves. I mean, his legs were all shot up. So he planned how he was going to stand by bracing the machine gun against the ground and then taking them out. And a patrol of, I believe it's 8 German soldiers came and found him. And as soon as one of them called to the others that American, he pushed himself up on the gun, stood up, and mowed these 6 of the 8 Germans down. And if I'm incorrect on the numbers, forgive me, because it's a lot of numbers. And the 2 remaining Germans surrendered. 6 were killed. The 2 surrendered. So he decided that they needed to be interrogated for what they knew, what was waiting for the convoy up ahead. So he put 1 in front of him, 1 behind him, and walked back 150, 100 yards to the road, brought his prisoners back, and everyone was just awestruck. And no one fired a shot. They just watched him pull these 2 prisoners back to the convoy. And his commander said, okay, get yourself, behind the lines to a medic. You got to get tended to. And he said, wait, these men need to be interrogated. And they spoke German, obviously. So his commander didn't really, they speak German. So he started to interrogate them in German, because he knew German from his upbringing in China, the free language. So he started to interrogate these Germans in German, and he got the intelligence they needed to proceed safely forward into the unscouted territory. And for all that, that's why he was awarded the Medal of Honor. It was just extraordinary what he did. And you can tell by his photo that he was a pretty tough guy, very tough guy.
No, absolutely. And just to backpedal a little bit and talk about, because it's coming up in the sidebar, the U.S. Army was segregated. We know all that, and African Americans weren't integrated till after the war. But that not everybody within the U.S. was against the idea of blacks joining regular units. Even in the early part of the war, there were some supporters of the cause. Yeah, yes, there was horrible senators and congressmen standing up and saying horrible things about these people, but there were other people who were supporters. Now, how well known, given that he'd fought in the Spanish Civil War, how well known would his story have been in those circles in the beginning part of World War II, or would it have been unknown? Because he's the kind of person they could have propelled forward and said, look, people saying that African Americans can't do this. Here's a guy who's literally just come back from doing it. What are you talking about? But how well known was his story in the early part of the war?
Well, it was well known because by his commanders, because he fought on the side, unfortunately, of the communists over in Spain. So that put him on the FBI's radar. So he was well known as an entity because they felt like he had communist sympathies. So it came back to haunt him years after the war. So he was a known commodity, but he was not for the right reasons.
Yeah, it didn't fit the right bill in more than one sense. And talk, I know we're going to carry forward the other individual stories as we go on, but just tell us a little about the process that began, a couple of decades ago, about looking at the awards for the various wars and looking at whether or not there'd been a lack of awards to people of different colors and minorities, because we have touched on that before, and I think we touched on it in the last time you were on there. But just for those who haven't seen that, just run through what the process was.
Sure. Up until the early 1980s, no black soldiers from World War I or World War II had been awarded the Medal of Honor, and that was investigated. About a black scholar, Harnden Hargrove, looked into why no black soldiers had been awarded the Medal of Honor from World War I. So he had one soldier that, I believe it was Henry Stowers. I could be incorrect because only 2 black soldiers had received the Medal of Honor from World War I. But he was pushing the story of a particular soldier in World War I that deserved the award and ended up getting the award in 1991. As a result of uncovering this about this World War I soldier, a congressman from New York said, well, why haven't any black soldiers from World War II received the Medal of Honor either? So they decided to push for the Army, Department of Defense, to do a study that cost about $400,000 at Shaw University in Raleigh, North Carolina. That took 3 years to figure out why there had been no blacks awarded the Medal of Honor in World War II either. And they discovered widespread racism and unspoken rule by the commanders that no black soldiers would be awarded the Medal of Honor no matter what. So a lot of the white commanders had to submit their names for the Distinguished Service Cross, the second highest award for valor in the United States military, even though they merited the Medal of Honor. So the Shaw study in 1993 recommended there were about 9 black soldiers who received the DSC. So they recommended those to be elevated to the Medal of Honor. And they came out with a list and submitted it back to the Army, and they had the final say. And they chose 7. And in 1997, the 7 were awarded the Medal of Honor, elevated, except for one, Reuben Rivers, who had received the Silver Star. And that's the story in a nutshell.
Thank you. And as far as we know, that's it now. They've kind of closed the matter, because I know Linda Hervier has been trying to get a couple of the people she wrote about on D-Day and elevated. Now they've said, no, we've done the investigation and it's closed and we're not reopening it. Is that where we still stand on that?
I don't think so, because there's a congressman in New York who's really pushing for Dory Miller. I don't know if you know who he is.
Yeah.
he really took out a number of planes during Pearl Harbor. And I know there's a real push for him as well. And I know Linda was advocating and has, there's a petition on for Waverly Woodson.
That's the one, yeah.
On D-Day, who treated over 100 patients. So I hope the door isn't closed, because I think there should be many more.
Well, clearly, but it would, any kind of investigation would uncover some painful truths that we already know, that racism was just everywhere, and not just in the U.S. Army. It was across the board there. Anti-Semitism, blah. We know it existed, but the more we pretend it didn't exist, the more we're leaving these wrongs unrighted. And I think it's about time we try to look at it all and give credit where due. But anyway, that's another discussion for another day, a rabbit hole. But back to the slides.
Sure.
Edward Carter, a great story, but let's move on.
Yeah, one more footnote on that before I talk about Vernon Baker.
Sure.
Is in my research, I discovered that during the Korean War, I believe 4 black soldiers received the Medal of Honor, and those awards, those medals, recognition was awarded right away in the 50s. And I had no idea. So it just seems like, and the same with Vietnam. So World War II is a definite anomaly in that case. But let's move on so we can cover all these.
Thank you for that. Yeah.
Incredible men. Vernon Baker was the only soldier who remained alive in 1997 to actually accept the Medal of Honor in person. And he was very emotional during the ceremony, and he thanked his fellow Medal of Honor recipients for what they had done, and he was an amazing soldier who's essentially the de facto company commander of the 307th outfit in Italy. He broke through almost impenetrable line. I believe it was called the Gothic Line, the northern German line in Italy, that an entire regiment couldn't break through. But he was in a position where he had taken his squad so far forward that they couldn't really go back easily. So he was attacking a castle stronghold, and they sent everything at these guys, mortars, and he held on. He took up 26 men, and 19 did not make it. And he was able to hold his position and fight off attacks and finally bring his men back down. But it had damaged the German morale that so many had been killed by his men and wounded that they felt like they had to move on. So move the line forward. So he was actually able to, from his work, break through that line. And because he was sent back, when he got back down to, this is a funny story, when he got back down to his commander's headquarters, he didn't have his helmet on. And that was what he liked to do. He never liked to wear his helmet in battle. So this commander, before he found out what he had accomplished, what they had done, and what they endured, he dressed him up and down. Where's his helmet? Where's your helmet? Blah, blah, blah. And he said, for this insubordination, I'm going to send you back up that hill. You're going to lead, part of another infantry unit and go back up that hill and see what the situation is. And when he led, they went back out at 3 o'clock in the morning. So when he led these other men forward, the Germans had left. That's how they knew they pushed them out. But because he wasn't wearing his helmet, his commander was very upset with him. And, but he just said he in his book and everything I found out, he said he never put his helmet back on again anyway. So
Typical of an officer to pick up someone for some detail like that. But everyone who's watching who served will know an officer who was exactly like that, who would go, yeah, just when you're doing something, he picks you up for something that isn't important. But yeah, it's a cliche, but it's a true cliche. But
yeah,
amazing story.
yeah, it is. But we can move on.
Yeah.
Reuben Rivers, who I mentioned earlier, was the only one of the 7 who was selected who had not received the DSC, Distinguished Service Cross, because he received the Silver Star. And he was only in service, I think, a month before he was killed. And he was in the 761st Tank Battalion. They trained in Louisiana. And he was just, I called him, Captain Williams, fearless fighter from Oklahoma, because he was. And the reason he received the Silver Star was they were pushing through a certain section, and the convoy of tanks, the Shermans, were stopped by a tree that had been mined and thrown across the road. So the infantry was pinned down, but tanks were blocked. The way was blocked, and so he decided to take his tank, which was basically almost last in the line, around 17 tank, or 17 in this line, and go up to this tree trunk, put his steel tow cable around it, get out, and be a target basically for mortars and small arms fire. Well, he hooked up this tree trunk with mines in it and took his Sherman and dragged the tree trunk back across the road so the convoy could continue. And his commander, Captain Williams, was just amazed by it. And they were able to continue on. And for that, he received the Silver Star, was awarded the Silver Star. And he knew about this. They knew about him being awarded this. He was in battle. I mean, they said, "You've won it." They notified him. But after that incident, he became captain. He was in Company A, the lead tanker. He became the lead in the company. So he was fit. He shot out a couple Tiger tanks at point blank range. He took out German artillery, 75 millimeter guns, and he was injured in his tank by a teller mine when he went over a railroad crossing. So he was badly injured in his leg, but he refused to go back behind the lines. His commander wanted him to retreat and get medical attention. But he said, "No, just give me a couple more days. We got to keep pushing through." And he said, "Okay." And they kept pushing through. And they went into this town, at the outskirts of this town, and a German 75 millimeter gun took aim on his tank, and he didn't see it till almost the last minute. And he radioed to Captain Williams, "I see it. I'm gonna fight it." And as they got ready to fire on his gun, the gun fired and split his tank in two and killed him and his tanker crew instantly. And so he was killed in action. Incredible bravery to try to keep pushing the convoy forward. And David Williams wrote a book about his time in the service in 761st, and he never wanted Reuben to be unrecognized, and he refused. Actually, Williams refused to put Reuben in for the DSC because he felt like he deserved the Medal of Honor, and he petitioned his commander, Hollis Hunt, I believe was his name. He kept, putting in written reports, and he kind of knew that nothing would happen. And years later, when the 761st received the Presidential Unit Citation for their work in combat, he kept pushing the Army. And when he discovered the Shaw study that I mentioned earlier, he was one of the people they contacted. And from what I could glean, like, he just would not let this drop. He was not going to let them not, award Reuben the Medal of Honor. He just, like, he became a burr in their side. And so he was the only recipient not awarded the DSC, because out of all right, we'll do it. We'll put his name in. Even though he didn't receive the DSC, so he was like a dog.
Wow.
And he was able to. Captain Williams was able to attend the 1997 ceremony at the White House, and he was interviewed by the Baltimore Sun newspaper, and he said he referenced Henry V, how it doesn't matter what color you are, you become a band of brothers. And people don't understand that, he said, in civilian life, but the color doesn't matter. And he said, I'm a Black Panther as well. And then he said, God can take me now, the deed is done, which was getting Reuben the Medal of Honor. Isn't that amazing?
Wow. It is amazing. And there's a couple of questions, Rob, coming in about the process of putting someone in for the Medal of Honor. And to be clear, there isn't a single, it's not like there's a Medal of Honor application form and you fill it in and it's either rejected or accepted. It's a complicated system where someone recognizes bravery, and then at different levels from company right up to the top, it can be put through for this type of award or that type of award. It can be downgraded from one, upgraded. There is no absolute set system, is there?
There isn't, and there has to be eyewitnesses. I believe there has to be a minimum number of eyewitnesses, and it has to rise to the level of above and beyond the call of duty, something extraordinary that a soldier wouldn't be required to do in their normal service. So that's why it's so difficult. And only about, I think under 500 were awarded to all soldiers in the United States in World War II. And that shows you how difficult it is when so many served in uniform.
Yeah, I mean, as we said, the Victoria Cross, the Medal of Honor, they should be really difficult to get. They should be exceptional. And I think when people have debates, we're going down a massive rabbit hole, or this figure should have received the Medal of Honor, this figure should have had that. One of the ways I answer is, if you're reading an account of someone's bravery and you're uncertain as to whether or not it's deserving of the Medal of Honor, Victoria Cross, it isn't deserving, because the ones that are, you just read it and go, well, of course. There's the proper Medal of Honor, Victoria Cross citations are so incredible. You just go, well, absolutely. And if there's any shadow of a doubt, it probably isn't worthy. And I think it came up in other shows. The indication that the Distinguished Service Cross is not an important achievement is nonsense. I mean, if you come out of the service with the Silver Star, the Distinguished Service Cross, you have done your job impeccably well. If you come out of the British Army with a DSO or whatever, you have done your job and some. Those top medals should remain really, really hard to get, so that they are something that's special. That's my feeling. Do you agree?
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more, because and I agree with the DSC, the second highest medal in the United States military for bravery in combat. That's nothing to sneeze at.
No.
And Sergeant Edward Carter was very proud of receiving the DSC, and he didn't think that he didn't even consider a Medal of Honor. He thought that was the ultimate. And he has a picture that's in the book of him receiving that award in Los Angeles, being pinned down by two older white men, and he looks very, very proud.
Yeah, no, it's and Yeah, it's a big discussion about that, and life isn't fair. There are, of course, we all know cases of people who were heroic but didn't receive a medal or didn't receive that credit for it. I mean, as a tour guide, I've done those stories. People have written about that, but that's life. Life isn't fair, and
Right.
it's not always possible to go back and look at every single action and say this person should have got this. But in this case, I'm heartily in favour of this process because there had been some discrimination. There had been some overlooking of some very, very important acts. But we'll keep on moving. And thanks for telling that story.
Sure. One more thing about the, and then I'll move on.
Okay.
The Medal of Honor. I don't know what it is with Victoria Cross, but it's remained unpolitical. Like, you can't like schmooze someone and say, well, he really deserves it, so we got to slide this in. It's remained above the politics of the military as the ultimate award because the DSC hasn't. And I can point to an example with Vernon Baker. Vernon Baker was the de facto commander, but he got a new company commander that went with him up the hill to that castle. His commander had never been in battle, ever. He was a salesman. So he kind of got, a little scared. And he told Reuben, I'm going to head back and get reinforcements. He hid in a shed, his commander, and then left Reuben and his men basically to die. I'm going to go back and get reinforcements. And I don't want to use his name, but people can look it up. And Vernon Baker knew he wasn't going to come back with reinforcements. He knew. And he found that out when this commander went to his commander, their commander, and said, they've all been wiped out. No need to send any reinforcements. They're all dead. And they weren't. And this commander actually received the DSC for the same patrol that Vernon Baker was on. And I found that out. And I said, this doesn't make sense. But it's true. He received the DSC as well. So I just want to mention that because it's important.
Yeah, it is important. And again, life isn't fair and injustices are always around us. But great stories and thanks for sharing them with us. So we'll move on. John Fox and History Explorer is looking forward to this one because he's our artillery forward observer fan. So he's been looking forward to this one. So back to you, Rob.
Yeah. Well, John Fox, I was able to speak with his daughter Sandra, and she provided some incredible photos to me. And John is the recipient I used to close the book. His is the final story in the book because it's so above and beyond incredible that someone in combat would do this. And he was part of the 366 Infantry. He trained in Massachusetts, headed a cannon company, and he was acting forward observer in Italy at Somma Colonia, which is in Tuscany. And he actually didn't normally do forward observation. He was a cannon company commander, but he volunteered to take service over the Christmas holiday in 1944. And during that time, they expected an attack. There was some intelligence of an attack, but he said, I'll go up and man. It's this stone 42-foot tower in the town, and it was pretty quiet. But the morning of the day after Christmas, I'd probably be corrected on that. But the Germans started shelling the town, and they had about 75 infantry in the town from the 366. And he was the observer, and he started radioing back that the Germans shelled in the early morning, then they stopped. So they thought it was just a probing attack, and it actually wasn't. It was sort of a softening up attack, because the infantry poured in. They had these Austrian and like these special mountaineer troops that climbed the mountains and surrounded this town. These incredible hardened Austrian soldiers came in from three directions and overran. I believe it was 3-1 in numbers, and he was directing artillery fire onto the soldiers coming in, and he was actually being accurate because he got a word from his commander that they hit a real artillery train in the back. And but after a while, it was so overwhelming that they were overrun. And he said, "There's more of them than there are of us. We have to, take them out." So we radioed back his own coordinates. His tower was surrounded, so he radioed back his coordinates to fire a salvo upon his coordinates. And they checked with them, and they said, "Are you absolutely certain these are your coordinates?" He said, "Yes, yes." He said, "Fire, fire these artillery shells, because there's more of them than there are of us." And they actually took it up to higher command, and I believe it was General Truscott who had to approve his request to fire on his own position, and he did. And the artillery, the firing officer, the person who actually had to give the commands from the fire control center to his own company, cannon company, was his best friend. So his best friend, in tears, had to radio the coordinates to his own cannon company to take his position out. And it's just unbelievable. And unfortunately, that's what happened. He fired on his own position, and they stopped the German advance right there in the town. And his body was recovered 2 days later, when the Americans, the Allies, went back in, and they found him. And I believe it also had a gunshot wound. So it's just an unbelievable story. But there's a story that deserves the Medal of Honor.
And just to say, as History Explorer is watching, who's serving World Artillery Officer, this story is known outside of the US. I mean, this is your kind of pinnacle forward observer story, and remains to this day. The ultimate thing you can do is bring down an artillery barrage on yourself in order to dislodge the enemy. So it's become quite a legendary action. And again, it's what we were saying earlier. If you read that citation, it's a Medal of Honor every day of the week. There's no question that is not deserving of the highest award. I mean, it's above and beyond. It's exactly what that medal should be for, in my opinion.
Absolutely, and it was also known at the time. As a matter of fact, the word of this spread at the time in the 1940s. They knew, people knew in the military that this had happened. And the thing with John is, here again, they delayed his DSC. He wasn't awarded the DSC till 1982.
Wow.
Which didn't make sense to me. And here again, it was someone that was pushing his story. But his ex-wife, Arlene, was able to accept that in 1982.
I mean that's insane, isn't it? I mean, because that's the sort of story that even your kind of hardcore racist would find it difficult to kind of not be impressed by that story. Regardless of what your own personal attitudes are, if you were told that story, you kind of would begrudgingly go, "Yeah, well, in that case, he deserves it." That's the sort of story that should have created a groundswell of public opinion. Say, for goodness sake, this medal these guys should be able to receive the Medal of Honor. Let's just do it. there's been some other cases, but this one is this is the nailed on absolute. No one can argue with it. This guy should have got the Medal of Honor, and he should have been all over the press, back in the war, and should have been the catalyst for change.
Yeah, to cut across all color barriers, because that's what it was. It was, and it shows you how times have changed.
Yeah, we're not completely out of the woods yet, but we are way more steps down the road than we were back then, which is good. But yeah, no, incredible story, and again, thanks for sharing with us. So we'll move on. There's a few more to go. Charles Thomas.
Charles Thomas, he was from Michigan, Detroit, Michigan, and he became a company commander, a legit company commander. And I'll explain that in the 614th Tank Destroyer Battalion. And the reason that he could become an officer is because the Tank Destroyer Battalions were a later addition to the military effort, a later unit. And the War Departments said that if we create this new unit of Tank Destroyer Battalions, they had to have officers of color. And that was the only way that he was able to go to officer school and take over a company. He went to officer school, I believe, in Colorado, and then trained at Fort Hood, and started with motorized Tank Destroyer Battalions, and then went to towed. And he was surrounding a town on the Siegfried Line, Kleinbach in France. And it was up on a mountain, a very high rise, and it was a very foggy morning. And it was a part of Task Force Blackshear. They were to draw fire so the infantry could encircle the town and take out I believe it was the 22nd Panzer Division. There were North African veterans, very tough soldiers, and they had 88s in the town and tanks. And his role was to draw fire, just draw interest away from what was happening behind the German position. And here again, his commander, I don't recall the commander's name, but it's in the book, obviously. He took this convoy of Tank Destroyer battalions and stopped at this foggy valley that led up to Kleinbach. And Thomas came up in a staff car, and he said, "What are we doing? What's going on?" And the commander was a little bit indecisive, and he said, "I'll take it. I'll take us forward. So he volunteered to take his guns from 3 guns up, with 1 in reserve, to the top of this hill. But when he got up there, they were kind of expecting this move by the military. So they had infantry in the woods, and they had everything trained on this position that he drove right into. And he was, his whole company was shot up, and he was wounded, I think, 6 or 7 times. So much so that he directed the battle, he directed the fire, losing consciousness. And he was so shot up that they finally were able to get him away, and all his men believed that he was dead, that he had died. He was so badly shot up. And the Germans took out 3 of his guns with 1 in reserve, and they held their position for over 2 hours with more than 50% casualties. And he held his ground. And we went back to the States, went to a hospital in the UK, was patched up, and went back to the States. and then was honored in a ceremony actually in Detroit with Jesse Owens and received the DSC when he was still in the hospital. But his men in his company, when they saw him, they thought they were seeing a ghost because everyone assumed that he had died. And he was one of the few that survived the war, and he became an IRS agent. He worked for the IRS, but we won't hold that against him.
No, that's a dark mark in his career there. But someone's got to do it. Someone's got to do it, I guess, haven't they? We've all got to pay our taxes. But interesting story, and again, thanks for sharing it with us.
Sure. Willie James. Yeah, he was a scout in the 104th Division, and he was. That's all he wanted to do. He wanted to be out front. He wanted to be scouting. He wanted to, see where the enemy was, and that's he became their lead scout. And they were going to this town, as you can see on the slide here, and they thought that it was almost empty, but it wasn't. It was filled with disheartened SS soldiers. You probably noticed, Paul, the SS fought to the bitter end. I mean, and this town was filled with them. And he scouted this town, and he went back to report to his commander that he thought it was pretty clear, but it was a very foggy morning. Things were uncertain, and they started going into the town like two abreast, and his commander was shot and killed immediately. And Willie was out front, and he circled back and was in the middle of the road trying to bring his commander off the road, and he was shot and killed while he was trying to tend to his commander. So he didn't run and hide. He was trying to help his commander, white commander, from Long Island, from Brooklyn, and fell in action. And he was recommended for the Medal of Honor, the DSC Medal of Honor, and he was a lead scout there. And he's from Kansas City, and incredible valor, Willie James Jr. And there are no pictures that survive of him. In this slide, these are men from his section, but he's not in it. It's just an example. And that drawing was commissioned by his widow, who hired an artist to draw his picture because no pictures existed of him.
Wow.
Yeah.
And a quick question for you, Rob. You said about he wanting to be the lead scout, wanting to be out there. Is there an element, do you think, with any of these figures that they are trying to prove themselves that much harder because of the racism they're experiencing, because of the negativity about African Americans and Mexicans within the US, et cetera, that these guys are going out there having to work even harder to even be accepted? Okay, they're serving within black units, but do you think that's a common theme in their desire to just shut the people up?
Very much so. Very, very much so, because there was a campaign during the war called the Double V campaign, which was spearheaded by a black newspaper, Pittsburgh Courier, that it stood for victory at home and abroad. And for black Americans, it felt like if they could show that they could do their duty like, other Americans, white Americans, that they would be given equality back home. So they were looking for a double victory. And they felt like if they could really show what they could do, their bravery, heroism, that when they got back, they would be given the equality they deserved. And unfortunately, they weren't.
Yeah, they maybe got one step further up the rungs of the ladder. But yeah, no, as we know, it wasn't an immediate recognition. But yeah, we could admire them for what they were doing, and yeah, it was a step along the way. And it's the same with class in the UK. A lot of working class people fighting for a world that was slightly fairer. And did they get it? Maybe, maybe not. That's a debate. But people's motivations for being brave can be about the immediacy of winning the war, but also about trying to fight for something better in the future for your nation, for your color, for your class, for your whatever. Yeah, it's interesting, the motivations of people and how they go at war, how they I don't say decide to be brave, because I don't think it's something you can just switch on, but how they push towards doing something incredible. But yeah, anyway, amazing stuff.
Well, it is. And what struck me in my research is that their fellow white soldiers and other, national, Indian and American Indian soldiers and other races, they saw their bravery and they would stand up for these men. I mean, the white soldiers would say, they would give them the respect that they had earned, but the civilians back home wouldn't. And I'm sure that was very frustrating for the white soldiers, from World War II to see how they were treated when they got back home.
Yeah, and important again. I mean, thanks for reminding us that not everybody was against them serving alongside. People who fought alongside them, people from different backgrounds, different things. That they were the first to recognize that when you're in foxhole buddies, doesn't matter what color you are. What matters is your strength of character and your dependability, and whether you're from East Coast, West Coast, North, South, left, right, black or white, that doesn't matter. But unfortunately, that didn't kind of filter back through to the wider society. Hence why we're still battling those same wars today, metaphorically speaking. But yeah, thanks for the further detail on this. We got one more to go, I think, haven't we?
George Watson. George was from Starkville, Mississippi, and in his story, I started out with it was difficult to find information on him, but I did a lot of research on all the men through genealogy services and censuses, and George. He was born in Starkville in, I believe it was 1915, and he was about a year and a half when they had a public lynching in Starkville, Mississippi, of these two black men who had murdered a porter on a train, and they admitted their guilt. But the thing that made it stand out, and I want to use that story to kick off his story, is the environment that he came from, is they made it a public spectacle. They'd invited, they called it Black Friday, and they invited newspapers from all over the country. And there were 5,000 spectators who made it a picnic, because they erected a gallows in the hollow of this area outside town. It was like an amphitheater, so people could bring their picnic lunch and see this public lynching of these two black men. And newspapers came from all over the country to report on this spectacle that, it just was horrific. It just showed me what the country was like in 1915 as far as race relations, and it was just like such a different time. So he was born out of this environment, just awful, and from a farm. But he's one of the, he actually, in my research, he ended up going to college, and he earned an engineering degree. And he was assigned to, it was part of the quartermaster corps, but he was called a laundry specialist. So he became a laundry specialist on a ship in the South Pacific Theater, and it was he was on a ship that was in a armada to Guinea, and it was shortly after the Battle of the Bismarck, where the Japanese were taken out. It was a decisive victory, naval victory. So the Japanese were wounded, and they were looking for a convoy to take out. So he was on a ship that was actually right in their target sites. So the Japanese came in and bombed his convoy. And I can't remember the name of the ship, but it's in the book. But they took out the engine room. It was sinking. So everyone had to abandon ship, and it was off the coast. And he was one of the better swimmers. So he was able to, men were, hanging on to anything they could get. He was able to rescue men who couldn't swim and bring them back to the rafts. So he swam time and time again to rescue men who were floundering in the water to try to bring them back. And towards the end, when the ship was actually sinking itself, he was too close to the ship, saving another soldier. These were soldiers, not sailors, from the ship, and trying to bring him back. And the ship took him down with it. I don't know what you call it, like the suction or just the water just drawing him down, and he drowned. And everyone had watched his heroism, and they couldn't believe it. And that he just kept saving man after man after man. So he was recommended for the Medal of Honor, for the DSC, and then the Medal of Honor for that incredible heroism of sacrificing. And he didn't think he was going to sacrifice himself. He was just doing what he felt like he had to do, and paid for it with his life. So,
wow,
incredible story, and well-deserving Medal of Honor with George. And we've come to the end here, and I really have to say that I really came to know these men as like close friends. I just felt so close to them, and because no one had ever looked into their stories before, and there wasn't any depth of research done on their stories, and I felt like I was charting new territory, and I felt like I was on a mission to tell their stories, and they became very, very, very good friends, close friends. So that's why I want to leave people with. These men were absolute heroes, and they deserve to have their stories told.
No, absolutely. I mean, I can't add anything to that. And thank you for bringing their stories into print, and thank you for bringing them to us as well. And again, folks, the link for the book is in the description below. But the interesting thing is that apart from the fact they are of the shared color, the shared ancestry, the stories are very different. There's except that they're all amazing. They're all incredible bravery. But anyone out there could look for heroes from a particular county, or heroes from a particular university, or heroes from any other kind of connecting thing, and find a set of diverse stories. It's just that these ones happen to be African Americans, but the heroism is out there in all shapes and sizes and forms, and you just got to look for it. But unfortunately, we're in a world where sometimes the same stories get told again and again and again, and it's not dismissing Audie Murphy's bravery or Dick Winter's bravery or certain people like that we talk about. But there are many, many more people out there whose stories perhaps have been a little bit not so much dropped, but just the big stories have so much traction, they keep on going.
Yeah, there's such a treasure trove of stories that haven't been told, as I'm sure you know, about World War II, that they could keep writing books forever.
Yeah, and as we know from your book, it's not, most of these people, as with our last George, they're not just overcoming incredible dangers to receive the medal. They're overcoming massive hurdles in their life as well. There seems to be something about the people who rise to great valor that often they've had to get over other hurdles as well, be it broken homes or difficult upbringing or whatever, but they seem to have a connecting similarity in that they are the kind of people that are able to see adversity and kind of bash on through it. They often have, Linda's book we talked about earlier, some of the people, Waverley at Woodson and others, they repeatedly had to prove themselves in these situations, and it seems to be the case with a lot of these heroes. I don't really like the word heroes, but in this context, it's perfectly applicable. They are get things done people.
Yeah, and they inspire so many others. Where you put yourself in place of a World War II soldier from any rural community in any country that you're shipped off, and you're scared, and you're trying to figure things out, and you have someone that stands up and shows such inspirational bravery that you're going to follow that person, and you're going to admire that person and take your own strength from that person. And that's what I think these stories also are so important to do that.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I remember speaking to a British platoon commander years and years ago. He said, you've got to accept, Paul, that some people are sheep and some people are shepherds. And I said, I don't mean that, because he said, I'm a sheep, but I'm inspired by that shepherd, that person who is organizing, that person who is, the draft was enormous in World War II. Literally millions of people thrust from obscurity and thrown into uniforms. And they all did their jobs, but you need those people, or most of them did their jobs, a huge percentage did their jobs, but you need those figures who are just able to draw on something else to inspire those ones around them. And it does seem that that's the other thing about these stories, is that they are individually important, but they also tend to have this recurring theme of then inspiring other people around them to carry on and tipping the balance of the battle, as well as being individual act of bravery, that they seem to be tipping points.
And that's human nature through history. I mean, you read any battle from any time period, and there's someone who emerges as the commander that just rallied the men, and they just did something extraordinary, against the odds. And that's the way it's always been.
Yeah. And we're grateful that we have those people in times of adversity, because that's one of the uniting things. I'm going down a rabbit hole now about human nature. When you have these most horrible stories about tsunamis or bombings or terrorist attacks, whatever it would be, there's usually that story of that person who becomes an amazing hero in the middle of that person. And they can be anybody. They can be a 12-year-old girl or a grandmother, but there's that person that somehow just rises to a challenge and becomes the focus of a rescue effort or a safety procedure. And that's the wonderful thing about human nature, is there seems to always be one of those people or several of those people when you need them. I don't know how that works out, but there tends to be that individual or others who will do that. So yeah, we're going down a rabbit hole talking about human nature now.
And one final comment on that, because I was reading something about the Titanic, and some of the survivors said that for some reason they felt no fear. They felt brave. They felt like they were that they could rise to what the disaster called for. And you need those people.
Yeah, there's a zone they somehow go into where they can't even afterwards, after the events, necessarily describe what they were doing. They kind of say almost like an out of body experience. They were just, and those stories of superhuman strength where women will lift cars off toddlers and things like that. And you go, how did that even work? Where does this inner resourcefulness come? We should do a show on that one day. Where does that come from? Bring someone in who understands, the human body and the mind, and what, it's like an increased superhero version of adrenaline rush that these people get, that somehow channels everything, and they get strength, they get insight, intelligence, and they get bravery in just the right moments to save others.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, Rob, we'll leave it there. Good luck with everything else you're doing. I'll find an excuse to bring you back on again in the future. In the meantime, good luck with the podcast. Good luck with the feature film. Good luck with everything else you're doing. And thank you very much for sharing these stories with us.
My pleasure, Paul. Thank you for having me on, and good luck with everything you're doing with your new channel and everything that's happening.
Cheers, thank you. So, folks, I'll see you all again tomorrow for another fantastic show. But meanwhile, this is Paul Woodad for World War II TV saying enjoy the rest of your Thursday. Cheers, everybody. Bye.